And you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5. And we are here with Derek Green, who a former city council member who was one of the folks running for mayor this time around. And he just announced last week that he was dropping out of the race. So we wanted to have him on to kind of talk a little bit about not only what the decision to drop out, but what's next for him. So thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be with both of you once again, as always. And thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation and dialogue with those who are watching and those who are listening.
Well, thank you. So I guess my first question for you is, and it's kind of the obvious question, which is what made you decide to drop out?
Well, when I had a chance to really think through the next steps of this race, and when Maria Cano Sanchez just made her decision, and actually the undecided numbers went up after she left, and looking at recent polls and looking at my poll numbers, and although my commercial helped move the needle, and I had another commercial we were about to air, but the amount of money and resources it just takes now to be able to run, you either have to be independently wealthy or have a super PAC. And as someone who's campaigned for ethics reform, done a lot of work in the space of campaign finance reform, as well as advocated for public financing of campaigns, talking with my team, and this ain't the amount of money that need to be spent to move the needle with those undecideds was just such an exorbitant amount of money. Also, with the other campaigns having that type of resources, this made it very challenging. And so just reflecting on all of those perspectives made my decision when I did.
Did it also did the amount of candidates also have an impact on that? Because you've got a lot of people that are still in this race.
Well, this is a very unique race, unique in the modern history of local politics. If you think about the 2015 race, the 2007 race, the 1999 race, and the 1991 race, when we've had an open mayoral election, we've never had this many currently elected officials at a local level all run at the same time. Think about 2015, you had Jim Kenney. Think about in 2007, you had Michael Nutter. Think about in 1999, you had John Street. And in 1991, you had Ed Rendell. And historically, there's been maybe one current local elected official that's running, current local elected official that's running, and then multiple other candidates who may be state officials or members of Congress or business people that decide to run. This race was unique when you think about the number of local elected officials that were currently in office who decided to run, and even just citywide elected officials. You had 4 current elected officials who had been successful in multiple terms, who have been elected citywide. So I think that also created a very unique perspective in this race. I don't think everyone thought everyone would run, but when you saw just the lack of leadership that was happening here locally, I think that also motivated a number of people, myself included, who are really concerned on the future of this city. And because of that concern, decided that they would run and provide their leadership to this campaign and for the future of the city of Philadelphia.
Okay. So were you surprised at the amount of money that's come into this race? It's like somewhere in the neighborhood of $22 million.
Well, I knew it was going to be an expensive race, but the amount of money that has already been spent has been exorbitant. You have some candidates who've already spent upwards of $7 million. Also, I did not think we would have in this race a dark money C4. We have had super PACs before, but we've never had this type of dark money C4 in the race. And based on the findings of the ethics board and their filing with the Court of Common Pleas, also had this type of coordination that we did not anticipate from my perspective. It's one thing if you're going to spend your own money. It's a different thing when you are, coordinating between a dark money C4 and a super PAC in a way that does not provide the opportunity for the voters to really see who are contributing campaign donations on your behalf.
Okay, now for our listeners, what is a C4?
So a C4 is just like you have 501c3s, C4 is a designation in the Internal Revenue Code, Section 501, that allows different types of nonprofit corporations to receive donations. The traditional 501c3 is a traditional charitable nonprofit corporation where you receive donations from individuals, and those individuals that donate to that organization for a charitable purpose can then include that in their taxes. And actually today is tax day. So it's interesting that you asked that question. But you can get a write-off for making that donation to a charitable organization. A C4 is a different type of entity where you are able to make contributions to an organization, but that organization, you do not get a benefit from a charitable purpose for tax purposes, but that organization can also donate, can push a political message as an entity. But there's also very strict rules at the federal and also local level regarding that type of entity. And we will see in a few weeks, Judge Roberts make a decision on the ethics board's filing regarding that type of activity that's happened in this race.
Okay, now when I would go to the forums and cover the 11 billion forums we have had as part of this mayor's race, one of the things that has kind of been top of mind for everybody has been public safety. I guess, have you been talking to the people that you were running against in terms of trying to get them to use some of your ideas regarding public safety, or were you all really that far apart?
Well, I think some of the candidates definitely have different perspectives on how to deal with public safety. I think other candidates are much more closer in alignment regarding the ideas regarding public safety. At this point, I am now no longer a member of city council or candidate for mayor. So I'm a citizen, just like all the other citizens in the city of Philadelphia who are undecided on where we should place our vote for the 100th mayor of the city of Philadelphia. Some would say I'm a citizen at large, and citizen is the most important title we have in a democracy. And so I'll be having conversations with various candidates regarding their perspectives, not only on public safety, but also some of the other real important issues in our city, like education, as well as poverty, and how they will address that in a conversation that will be a little more in depth than what we've had in a 90-second response to a question from a panel or moderator.
Okay. So has anyone approached you about an endorsement?
I'm just like my next steps, I'm keeping all my options open. I'm keeping all my options open in reference to conversations I'm having. I've always been type of person as an elected official that keep an open door policy. So people from all different backgrounds and perspectives, even those I may not be as aligned with, I'm open to have conversations, and I will do my deliberations just like the almost 29, maybe 30% of undecided voters will do as we prepare for the May 16th primary.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time with us, and I'm going to give you to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And thank you, Mr. Green, so much for spending some time with us here. One of the things that troubles me the most about this race right now is that, You and Maria Cuna Sanchez were two thoughtful members of city council who had a lot of ideas, and then, based, looking at how the financing of the campaigns went, had a hard time letting people know about your ideas and your thoughts and things that you wanted to do. You were an advocate for some public funding and some different ways of funding campaigns. Ideally, what would this look like in Philadelphia, and how can we make this better in the future?
Well, I think two things are important as we look at not only this race, but also the April 4th race in Chicago. But at least in Chicago, they have runoffs. So you had the incumbent mayor who was not successful in the primary in Chicago, as well as other candidates that decided to run, like Congressman Garcia. And then you had two final candidates, former Philadelphia School Superintendent Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson. So having an opportunity, at least like Chicago, where you have multiple candidates, you have the ability to winnow that field down to a smaller number of candidates. I have been a proponent of ranked choice voting. I've had hearings in city council regarding that. I've had conversations both in the House and Senate with members of those bodies regarding ranked choice voting. That's something I think coming out of this process, we as a Commonwealth should look at as a way to make sure we have more people involved in the political process. I think the most recent poll I saw either on MSNBC or CNN talked about how younger voters are more and more likely to become independent. And historically, what happens as younger voters are getting involved in politics or voting, they may register Democrat, Republican, or Independent. But even those who are independent eventually decide to become Democratic or Republican. What's happening now is that people are staying independent, and then based on the various candidate, they may vote Democrat in this election or Republican in that election. And because we have closed primaries, that means that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and more specifically here in the city of Philadelphia, whoever wins the Democratic primary, more likely than not will be the next mayor of the city of Philadelphia, and also more likely for the next 8 years. So if you're someone and a younger voter that is, interested in getting involved in politics, that makes a statement. And so having some of those reforms, and then also how we enable those who are running for office to communicate to voters, and the cost of doing so is important. It's gotten more and more challenging because of the way you have to communicate in such a large city like Philadelphia. So the ideas of public financing of campaigns are something that I will continue to advocate for. And I think coming out of this election, there will be a stronger cry from constituents, I think both for public financing of elections as well as ranked choice voting.
Yeah, I think so. So one of the questions, and I'm also very interested in this as well, so it's nice that it all fits together. People want to know what it's like to actually run for mayor. How does that work? So take us back to the beginning. What was it like for you to make that decision? What had to be in place for you to say, yes, I'm going to do this now?
So this was not an easy decision, although I've had people for years saying, when are you running for mayor? From some of my colleagues when I was the president of Democratic municipal officials, some of my executive board members are current mayors, and kept saying, when are you running for mayor? To other roles I've served in, both as executive committee member of the National League of Cities, and even here in Pennsylvania as president of the Pennsylvania Municipal League, and then also people around the city. But running for this type of race is a very humbling perspective. And I remember reading Barack Obama's book, and I do a lot of summer reading. And that was one of my summer reads, I think the year before last. And it takes a certain level of confidence, but also fear. It's a combination of both. You have to be sure of yourself that you can do this job. And that takes a mental process to go through, but also fear that if you win, you now are responsible for 1.5 million and change residents and making their lives better. And can you do what's needs to be done in a time of crisis? So those are things you deal with. And as I contemplated a lot of those things, and I remember, a couple uh, Zoom meetings I had with some of my Democratic municipal official colleagues, and because members of that board and my executive committee are elected officials from around the country, we would meet often on Friday afternoons, like board meetings were typically 4 o'clock our time, but of course that's 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And just hearing some of the ideas of how they were using CARES dollars as a way to move their cities forward. Just hearing more of other things at the national level and how those things were not happening here in Philadelphia. And just a real frustration I was having and hearing from citizens around the city. And then when the mayor made his statement, July 4th of last summer about not wanting to be mayor, and just thinking about some of the other people who were thinking about running, it just taking all those perspectives and this real reflection and taking some time over summer to make that decision to run for mayor of the city of Philadelphia, a place where I was born. So it was not an easy decision. It was a decision based on a lot of reflection and prayer and conversations, as well as talking with my family as well, because this is an endeavor that is different than running for city council at large. Although I've run citywide, there's a different perspective.
So is the skill set in running for office mutually exclusive from governing? Are there overlaps? How would you describe that?
Well,
they're different things, right?
and you have to have a different perspective to govern than to run. And I've talked to a lot of mayors, and I talked to a lot of our recent mayors, from Michael Nutter to John Street to Ed Rendell, about their experiences and how to make that transition. And it's not an easy transition. We do have a strong mayor form of government, but as mayor, you are often trying to use your skills of persuasion to get people to do certain things, which is not easy. And it's not an easy process. And being mayor, from my conversations with them and others, you really focus a lot more on the servant side of leader, because you have to continue to push and move things forward, even in spite of some of the challenges that are happening. But at the end of the day, a mayor's got to inspire hope. We've had some real difficult issues coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, his horrific gun violence that we're seeing in Philadelphia, over 500 homicides the last 2 years. So you have to inspire hope in spite of all of the challenges, and you have to keep pushing forward, and you have to be willing to be cursed at, screamed at, people being angry at decisions you're making. But I think you have to be strong of your convictions that after you've done the research and thought through, make a decision that you think is the best decision for the citizens of the city of Philadelphia, and be willing to live with that decision. And also, when you make a mistake, be willing to say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm not always going to get everything right, and be upfront and honest. I think that's something that's missing in our public discourse, especially from elected officials who are willing to say, I tried this based on the information I had at the time, thought this was the best decision, but I was incorrect and I made a mistake. You don't see that, I think, in current discourse with elected officials. It's basically, I make a decision, and regardless if that decision is right or wrong, people just double down on that decision and are not willing to say if they made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an incorrect perspective that does not really show leadership. Now, you need to make sure that you're doing all that you can to see that what you tried is actually working. And then sometimes you need to give some enough time to see if the idea is working. But if you go through that process and it's really not working, you should be open and honest with citizens. And I say, you know what? I thought this was the best direction, but now we see it was not. And so we're going to course correct.
So what was the day-to-day of the campaign like for you?
So, my days have always been pretty long. I tend to, get up at, let's see, most days I was getting up at 4:45 because I try to get in the gym around 5 o'clock. And most days I was going to bed at 11:30, 12 a.m., which is not good. Now, I've been doing that type of schedule for a long time, so it did not change. But going from get up in the morning, working out, coming home, showering, taking my son to St. Joseph University, Kidding Center. Then from there, if on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I had an 8:30 call. So often I was going to call in the car while dropping my son off. Then after I dropped my son off, I was probably going to a meeting or going to do call time and then have a meeting around 12, 1 o'clock in between, doing call time after that again. And then I would have 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 events at night till about 10:30, 11 o'clock. Having days, I remember one week in particular where we had, it was, I'm trying to remember what holiday it was. It was I just remember that week we had in over the course of 6 days, including Saturday, we had 10 canvas forms. And I shot my 2 commercials at one on that Friday. So, the amount of canvas forms were exorbitant. I mean, I remember 2015, 2019, 2007, and the growth of questionnaires, where at one point, people were using one questionnaire for multiple groups. And that was probably 2007. 2015, they expanded. 2019 expanded even more. Now, this time, the questionnaires were a lot, and the canvas forms were a lot. And because I, as an at-large member of City Council, know a lot of people, I remember groups would reach out to me in December. Hey, we're going to have 3 canvas forms in these dates. Groups are reaching out to me in January saying we're having canvas forms on these dates, all the way up until, I would say about a month ago, or actually 3 weeks ago. Group say, hey, we're doing these canvas forms. I'm like, well, you do realize that back in December, January, these other groups had scheduled a canvas form on this date. And someone say, well, what about this date? Well, that's already booked. And there were some dates. I tried to make almost every canvas form, but there were 2 forms in particular that I couldn't make because I scheduled something on that date because that was the only date that was available. And then, 3 weeks before the event, someone decided, well, that date looks open, so let's have a canvas form on that night. And I had a conflict, so I couldn't make it. And so that was challenging, just trying to get in all of the questionnaires, because sometimes I would answer questionnaires after the canvas form at like 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock, trying to get them in for that day. And my campaign staff would go draft and I would go back and revise and make edits and revisions and send it in.
All right. I'd like to turn it back over to Denise Clay Murray here on Hall Monitor.
Thank you, Larry. I guess my last question for you is, or one of my last questions for you is, are you surprised at the number of people who are still undecided about this race? I mean, the Black Leadership PAC put out a poll that showed that roughly 42% of the city's African-American population still doesn't know who they're voting for mayor yet. Are you surprised at that at all?
Not necessarily. I know when I made the decision to suspend my campaign, a number of people that I reached out to said, one, well, I don't know who to vote for. I'm now undecided. I would venture that happened also to some of Maria's supporters. I had some, unfortunately, said that they weren't not going to vote. And I said, listen, no, you need to vote. And they were like, well, you were the only person I was going to vote for, and now I'm not voting. And I said, well, no, you need to be engaged in the political process. So it is interesting when you have this number of people that have been successful as elected officials citywide running. And I think that also makes it more challenging because you have a lot of people that people have known and seen over the years. And, it's hard to make distinctions in 90-second or 60-second question and answer responses on a stage. And then you have the commercials, which are crafted by the various campaigns to present a certain perspective. So I think I always said this race was going to come down to the end, and it was people, and the winner was going to win based on a strategy that it was able to capitalize and move the needle late. And it's looking that that is the case, considering so many people are undecided in reference to who should be the 100th mayor of the city of Philadelphia.
Okay. And I guess my final question for you is, you said you're keeping your options open, but one of the options that I see on Twitter for you in particular is district attorney. There's 3 years before that race begins. Is it something you're considering? Is it something you would want to do?
As I've said to a number of people, and I've heard various perspectives, that someone said, don't be surprised if you see Derek for DA t-shirts in green around the city. I'm keeping my options open. I've spent, 20 years in City Hall, from my time as a member of council member task force staff to being an elected official. So I am using this time to really evaluate what's the next step in my career and how I can be the most effective citizen at large here in the city of Philadelphia.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time, and best of luck to you. And we'll be keeping an eye out, on you to see what you do next. And also, we may have you on a time or two between now and whatever is next for you.
No problem.
Actually, one more quick question.
Okay.
The public bank. That was something that you were like really at the forefront of. And I still get releases from, the Public Bank Coalition from time to time. Are you going to be putting maybe a little more time into that? Is that something you're still, interested in seeing the city have?
I am definitely interested in seeing the city have that type of entity. I think it helps to address the issues of, one, growing small businesses, especially in Black and brown communities. That also will help to address our poverty. And also, as I've said on the campaign trail, one of the best ways to reduce crime is to give someone a job. The best creators of jobs are small businesses. So if this is an entity that can help grow small businesses, it's also an entity that can help address the gun violence in our city. So I definitely would like to see that entity move forward. And it's something that hopefully that the next mayor considers as a benefit for the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Pleasure to be with you again, as always.